The Whisper of Shadows. Keanu Reeves had wrapped up a grueling day on set. The warm glow of the Californian sun had long faded, leaving behind the cool embrace of twilight. He leaned against his trailer, exhausted but satisfied, his face smeared with the day's toil, and his thoughts scattered. The director, an animated man named Paul, sauntered over, his trademark clipboard tucked under his arm. "That's a wrap, Keanu," Paul exclaimed, slapping him on the shoulder. "Brilliant work as always." Keanu smiled faintly, his energy waning. "Thanks, Paul. Looking forward to seeing how it all comes together." As the crew dispersed with laughter and camaraderie, Keanu felt the familiar pull of solitude. Despite their encouragement to join the post-shoot celebration, he declined politely with his signature humility. Sliding into his black SUV, the city lights blurred against the darkened skyline as he drove aimlessly, seeking a moment of quiet amidst the noise of his life. Hunger gnawed at him, and the sight of the golden arches glowing in the distance promised a momentary respite. The McDonald's parking lot was sparse, and the cool night air felt refreshing as Keanu stepped inside. He ordered a simple meal at the kiosk, finding a quiet booth in the corner to settle into. The space was a cacophony of murmured conversations, the hum of the kitchen, and the occasional squeal of children. For a moment, it was just what he needed, a place to disappear. As his eyes closed briefly, the sound of faint giggles drew his attention. He looked up to see two small figures moving between tables, a pair of identical twin girls, no older than 8, dressed in old-fashioned, pristine white dresses. Their dark curls framed their cherubic faces, their small hands clasped together. Keanu watched as they approached diners, their presence barely acknowledged. The few who noticed them waved them off with irritated expressions, while others didn't even look up from their phones or meals. It wasn't just their presence that was strange, it was how they moved. The twins glided rather than walked, their steps too synchronized to feel natural. They didn't speak aloud, their mouths barely moving, but their intent seemed unmistakable. Keanu frowned, a protective instinct stirring in his chest. As they neared his table, their movements slowed. Their matching blue eyes locked onto his, wide and knowing. "Hello," he said softly, leaning slightly forward, unsure of what else to say. The taller twin tilted her head, a small smile creeping onto her face. "We've been waiting for you." Keanu blinked, startled by the unexpected words. "Waiting for me?" he echoed. The shorter girl spoke then, her voice no louder than a whisper, but it carried an eerie weight. "You're the one who can help, but you have to promise." His brow furrowed. "Promise what?" The girls exchanged a glance before stepping closer, their tiny hands resting on the edge of his table. The taller one leaned in, her voice a hushed plea. "You have to listen. Everything will change if you do." Keanu's heart raced. Something about their presence unsettled him, not in a fearful way, but in a way that made him feel as though he were on the precipice of something monumental. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. The shorter twin held his gaze, her eyes brimming with an emotion he couldn't decipher. "They're coming for you. But if you don't come for us first, it will be too late." A shiver ran down his spine as he leaned back, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. The girls looked at each other once more, as if silently communicating, before they turned and began to walk away. "Wait," Keanu called after them, rising from his seat. But as he followed them toward the exit, the cold night air greeted him, and the parking lot stretched out empty. The twins were gone, echoes of the forgotten. Keanu Reeves stood motionless at the entrance of the McDonald's, the cool night air swirling around him. The empty parking lot stretched out before him, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. The twins were nowhere to be seen. Their cryptic words replayed in his mind. "You have to come for us first, or it will be too late." His fingers instinctively curled into fists at his sides. He scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. A shadow, a silhouette, anything. Nothing. The night felt eerily still, the kind of silence that seemed to swallow sound. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir." Keanu turned sharply to see the cashier standing hesitantly at the doorway. The young man looked nervous, clutching a mop handle like it was a lifeline. "Are you okay? You've been standing there for a while." Keanu hesitated. His instincts told him to brush it off, to wave away the concern. But something in the twin girls' warning had lodged itself deep in his chest. "Did you see them?" he asked. The cashier blinked, confused. "See who?" "The two girls. The twins. They were in here a moment ago." The cashier's brow furrowed. "Girls? I don't think so. It's been pretty quiet tonight." Keanu's stomach sank. "You didn't see two girls in matching dresses. They were walking between tables." The young man shook his head slowly. "No, sir. I've been up front the whole time. You're the only one I've seen come in for the last hour." Keanu felt a chill creep up his spine. He knew what he saw. Those girls weren't figments of his imagination. "Thanks," he muttered, turning back toward his car. As he slid into the driver's seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. His food sat untouched on the passenger seat, now cold and unappetizing. The twins' voices haunted him, their plea echoing in his mind like a melody he couldn't unhear. Keanu started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The roads were quiet, the city's usual hum replaced by an unsettling stillness. He drove aimlessly, unsure of where he was going, yet unable to shake the compulsion to keep moving. Then he saw it. On the side of the road, illuminated by his headlights, stood the twins. They were on the edge of a field, their white dresses stark against the darkness. They didn't wave or call out. They simply stood there, side by side, watching him. Keanu slammed on the brakes, his heart hammering in his chest. He threw the car into park and stepped out, his voice cutting through the night. "Hey, wait." The twins turned in unison and began walking into the field. Their small forms disappeared into the tall grass, swallowed by shadows. Keanu hesitated. Every rational thought in his mind screamed for him to stay put, to get back in the car and drive away. But the pull he felt was undeniable. Taking a deep breath, he followed them. The field was vast, stretching into the horizon. The cool grass brushed against his jeans as he pushed forward, guided only by the faint rustling ahead of him. The twins' forms were barely visible now, their white dresses flickering like ghostly beacons in the moonlight. "Where are you going?" Keanu called, his voice laced with urgency. "What do you want me to do?" They didn't respond. Minutes passed as he trudged deeper into the field, the distant glow of the city fading behind him. The air felt heavier here, as though it were pressing down on him. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the twins stopped. They stood at the edge of a shallow ravine, the earth crumbling away into darkness. Keanu approached cautiously, his breath visible in the chilly night air. "What is this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease prickling his skin. The taller twin turned to him, her face solemn. "This is where it started." Keanu frowned. "Where what started?" The shorter twin stepped forward, pointing down into the ravine. "You'll see." Keanu peered over the edge. At first, he saw nothing but the jagged rocks and uneven ground. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed something glinting faintly below. A piece of metal, partially buried. "What is that?" he asked, his curiosity overcoming his hesitation. The girls didn't answer. Instead, they reached out, their small hands gripping his sleeves. Their touch was cold, sending a shiver down his spine. "You have to go," the taller twin whispered. "Go where?" Keanu demanded, his voice rising. "You need to tell me what's going on." The shorter twin tightened her grip. "It's not safe here. They're watching." Before Keanu could respond, a sound broke through the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. His blood turned to ice as he looked around. his eyes darting to the shadows that now seemed to move and shift with life. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his heart pounding. The twins released him, their expressions calm despite the growing tension. "You have to trust us," the taller twin said. "If you don't leave now, you won't get another chance." Keanu hesitated, torn between the inexplicable trust he felt for these mysterious girls and the primal fear coursing through him. The growl came again, louder this time, closer. Without another word, the twins turned and began walking back toward the field. Keanu followed, his every nerve on edge as the shadows seemed to close in around them. As they reached the edge of the field, Keanu glanced back toward the ravine. The glint of metal was gone, replaced by a darkness so profound it felt alive. He shuddered and quickened his pace, desperate to leave it behind. When they emerged back onto the roadside, the twins stopped abruptly. Keanu turned to them, his voice trembling. "Who's watching? What do they want?" The shorter twin looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with an ancient sadness. "It's not just us. There are others. They're trapped, just like we were." "Trapped where?" The taller twin stepped forward, her expression resolute. "You'll know when the time comes, but you have to be ready." Keanu's frustration boiled over. "Ready for what? I don't even know what's happening." The twins exchanged a look, their expressions unreadable. Then, without warning, they began to fade, becoming less solid, their forms dissolving into the night. "Wait," Keanu shouted, reaching out. But his hands grasped only air. The twins were gone. Keanu stood alone on the roadside, the weight of their words pressing down on him. His breath came in short, uneven bursts as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. And then he saw it. In the distance, near the edge of the field, a pair of headlights appeared, piercing through the darkness like twin eyes. The low rumble of an engine followed, growing louder as the vehicle approached. Keanu's instincts flared. He stepped back into the shadows, his pulse racing as the car slowed to a crawl. The windows were tinted, hiding the driver's identity, but he could feel the weight of their gaze. The car stopped for a moment, idling silently. Then, as if making a decision, it sped off into the night, leaving Keanu with more questions than answers. As the silence returned, Keanu exhaled shakily. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than he could comprehend. But one thing was clear: the twins were right. Everything was about to change. Keanu stood motionless in the shadow of the roadside trees, the faint hum of the departing car fading into the distance. The vehicle's ominous presence left a weight on his chest, like an invisible hand pressing down. His mind raced with questions. Who had been inside that car? Were they connected to the twins? And what had the girls meant by, "It's not just us"? He shook his head, trying to ground himself. Standing still wouldn't get him answers. Keanu walked back to his SUV, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the door handle. The car felt like a sanctuary compared to the unsettling events of the past hour. He sank into the driver's seat and sat in silence for a moment, staring blankly at the road ahead. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, startling him. He picked it up and saw a text from Robbie, an old friend and NYPD officer he'd met years ago. "Robbie, hey man, been a while. Still good to catch up. Let me know if you're in town." Keanu hesitated. He had planned to meet Robbie the next time he was in New York, but this situation was spiraling into something far beyond his grasp. If anyone could help him navigate this, it was Robbie. His fingers hovered over the screen before he finally typed. "Hey Robbie, need to talk. Something weird is going on. Can I call you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Robbie, always. Call me anytime." Keanu hit the call button and waited as the line rang. Robbie answered after the second ring, his voice warm but tinged with concern. "Keanu, everything okay?" "I'm not sure," Keanu admitted, running a hand through his hair. He recounted the night's events in detail, from the twins' strange appearance at the McDonald's to their cryptic warnings and the eerie car that had followed. Robbie listened intently, his occasional hums of acknowledgement the only interruptions. When Keanu finished, there was a long pause. Then Robbie spoke, his tone more serious. "This sounds off, like really off. Twin girls in matching dresses, acting in sync, disappearing into thin air. And that car, it doesn't sound like a coincidence." "You think it's connected?" Keanu asked, gripping the steering wheel. "Maybe. I've seen cases where people get involved in some strange stuff. Trafficking, cults, you name it. But this feels different. Supernatural, even." Keanu hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to embrace the idea of the supernatural, but everything about the night defied logic. "What should I do?" "Stay safe, first and foremost," Robbie said firmly. "If this is some kind of organized group, they'll want to scare you off. That car could have been a warning. But if the girl said others are trapped, you might be onto something bigger. Do you have any idea where they might be?" Keanu thought back to the ravine, the way the twins had pointed to the glinting metal buried in the darkness. He told Robbie about it, and the officer's tone sharpened. "That sounds like it could be a site for something. You said it felt heavy there, like the air was wrong." "Yeah," Keanu replied. "It was like the ground itself was alive. And there was something buried. Metal, I think." Robbie exhaled deeply. "Look, Keanu, if you're willing, I can fly out to help. But if you're not sure what you're dealing with, I'd advise caution. These things can spiral out of control fast." Keanu nodded, even though Robbie couldn't see him. "Thanks, man. I'll think about it." As he ended the call, Keanu stared out the windshield. He knew he couldn't wait for backup. The twins' warning had been urgent. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. He drove back toward the field, his headlights slicing through the night. The ravine loomed ahead, shrouded in an oppressive darkness that seemed thicker than before. He parked on the shoulder and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. The field was silent now, the wind still. Keanu shivered as he approached the edge of the ravine, his flashlight illuminating the jagged terrain below. He scanned the area for the glint of metal he'd seen earlier, but it was gone. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping closer. As he leaned over the edge, the ground shifted slightly beneath his weight, sending a small shower of pebbles tumbling down. Keanu crouched, his fingers brushing against the cold earth. He began to dig, his instincts driving him despite the chill that crept into his bones. After several minutes, his fingers struck something solid. He cleared the dirt away, revealing a rusted piece of metal embedded in the ground. It looked like part of an old broken sign. He brushed off more dirt and shone his flashlight over the surface, revealing faded letters. "Restricted area. Ki Piauyug." Keanu's brow furrowed. What kind of restricted area had been here? And why was it abandoned? Before he could process further, the low growl from earlier returned, vibrating through the air like a primal warning. His heart pounded as he whipped around, shining the flashlight into the darkness. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, something large and fluid, slipping between the trees. He froze, every muscle in his body tense. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his chest. The growl grew louder, reverberating around him. And then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It wasn't human. Standing on the edge of the trees was a creature unlike anything Keanu had ever seen. Its form was shrouded in shadows, its body elongated and unnaturally thin. Eyes like glowing embers burned from its skeletal face, and its limbs moved with an otherworldly fluidity. Keanu stepped back, his breath hitching. "What are you?" The creature tilted its head, as if studying him. Its voice, when it spoke, was a low, guttural rasp that seemed to echo inside his mind. "They warned you," it said, "but you did not leave." Keanu's pulse raced as he realized the twins had been right. They were watching. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice firm despite the icy terror in his veins. The creature's mouth curled into what might have been a smile. "To see how far you'll go." Before Keanu could react, the creature lunged forward, its shadowy form merging with the darkness around him. He stumbled back, the world spinning as a piercing noise filled his ears, a sound like 1,000 whispers screaming in unison. When the noise stopped, Keanu was alone. The field was empty, the ravine silent. The oppressive heaviness in the air was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. But in the distance, faintly illuminated by his flashlight, lay something new, a trail of footprints leading away from the ravine. They were small, identical, and unmistakably human. The twins. Keanu exhaled shakily, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to back down now. Whatever this was, he was in it for the long haul. He picked up the flashlight, his steps following the trail into the unknown, into the shadows. The air was crisp and unnaturally quiet as Keanu followed the trail of tiny footprints through the field. Each step felt heavier, as though the ground itself resisted him. The flashlight's beam wavered slightly, his hands trembling from a mix of adrenaline and uncertainty. The footprints led away from the ravine, winding through the tall grass and into a dense grove of trees that loomed like a dark cathedral. The further he ventured, the darker the path became, the foliage above forming a canopy that choked out the moonlight. Keanu paused, his instincts flaring. Something about the grove felt alive. The shadows weren't just still, they seemed to shift subtly, as though they were observing him. He tightened his grip on the flashlight. "All right," he muttered to himself, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. "If I can survive Hollywood, I can handle this." The attempt at humor did little to ease his nerves. As he stepped deeper into the grove, the air grew colder and an odd hum began to vibrate in his ears. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, a low, pulsing frequency that made his teeth ache. The footprints became harder to follow, the soft earth now littered with leaves and debris. "Girls?" he called, his voice echoing faintly. "Are you out here?" No response. Only the hum, which seemed to grow louder the further he went. Keanu pushed forward, weaving through the labyrinth of trees, until he stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated structure, a bunker-like building partially swallowed by the earth. Its concrete walls were cracked, vines snaking their way through the fissures, and a rusted metal door hung ajar. The hum was louder now, emanating from the bunker like a heartbeat. Keanu hesitated at the edge of the clearing, his mind racing. The twins' words echoed in his memory. "It's not just us. There are others." Something was inside that bunker. He could feel it. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the clearing. Each step felt like a commitment, as if the world around him held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. When he reached the door, he pushed it open fully. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound slicing through the stillness. Inside, the bunker was a stark contrast to the decaying exterior. The walls were lined with strange symbols etched into the concrete, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "What the hell is this?" Keanu muttered under his breath. The room smelled damp, the air thick with a metallic tang. His flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of shelves filled with jars, old papers, and mechanical parts. The hum was deafening now, vibrating in his chest. As he moved further inside, he noticed something scrawled on the far wall. It was a message, written in a shaky hand. "Don't let them take you. Escape if you can." Keanu's stomach churned. The urgency of the message was palpable, the handwriting erratic and desperate. "Escape what?" he whispered. His answer came almost immediately. A soft, echoing giggle drifted through the bunker, sending chills down his spine. He spun around, his flashlight darting across the room, but saw nothing. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice firm despite the fear tightening his chest. The giggle came again, this time closer. It was unmistakably a child's laugh, but it was warped, distorted, as though it were being played through a broken speaker. Keanu gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move forward. The corridor at the back of the room beckoned him, its walls narrowing as he walked. The symbols grew more intricate here, their faint glow casting eerie patterns on his face. At the end of the corridor was another door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open, revealing a chamber lit by a flickering light overhead. In the center of the room was a large, circular platform, surrounded by strange machinery. The equipment looked old yet advanced, wires snaking across the floor and disappearing into the walls. And standing on the platform were the twins. Keanu froze. The girls stood side by side, their hands clasped together, their white dresses glowing faintly under the flickering light. They looked up at him as he entered, their expressions calm but unreadable. "You found us," the taller twin said, her voice carrying an unnatural clarity. Keanu stepped closer, his flashlight now pointed at the ground. "What is this place? What's going on?" The shorter twin tilted her head. "It's where they take them, where they keep the ones who don't escape." A chill ran down Keanu's spine. "Who's they?" "The thing I saw earlier." The twins exchanged a glance. "They're not one thing," the taller twin explained. "They're many. They watch, they take, and they never stop." Keanu looked around the chamber, his heart pounding. "Why are you here? Why did you lead me to this place?" The shorter twin stepped forward, her small face serious. "Because you can stop them." "Stop them?" Keanu repeated, his voice rising. "I don't even know what they are." The taller twin reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. She held it out to him, her hand trembling slightly. "Take this." Keanu hesitated before stepping forward and taking the object from her hand. It was a key, old, rusted, and warm to the touch. "What does this do?" he asked, studying it. "It opens the way," the taller twin said cryptically. Before Keanu could press for more answers, the hum that had been vibrating in the background grew louder, deeper, and more menacing. The ground beneath them trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. "They're coming," the shorter twin whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Keanu's instincts flared. "We need to go. Now." The twins nodded, their calm demeanor cracking as the hum grew into a deafening roar. Keanu grabbed their hands and pulled them toward the exit, his heart racing. As they ran through the corridor, the walls seemed to close in around them, the glowing symbols pulsating wildly. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, and that same guttural growl from earlier echoed through the bunker. They'd reached the main room, the symbols on the walls now blindingly bright. The girls tugged at his hands, leading him toward the exit. Just as they reached the door, a figure materialized in front of them, a massive, shadowy form with glowing ember eyes. The creature blocked their path, its presence suffocating. Keanu stepped in front of the twins, his body instinctively shielding them. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. The creature tilted its head, its ember eyes narrowing. "You think you can defy us?" it growled, its voice a thunderous echo. Keanu tightened his grip on the key, its warmth now searing into his palm. He didn't know what the key could do, but he felt its power coursing through him. "I don't think," he said, his voice firm. "I act." With that, he raised the key and pointed it toward the creature. The room erupted in light, and everything went white. The key to the void. The blinding light swallowed everything. Keanu felt the weight of the twins' small hands gripping his arms as the heat from the key in his palm intensified. The creature's guttural growl morphed into an agonized screech that reverberated through the bunker, shaking the walls and sending a cascade of debris from above. When the light finally dimmed, Keanu opened his eyes, expecting chaos. But instead, he found himself in silence. The bunker was gone. He stood on a vast, featureless plain under a sky streaked with shifting hues of crimson and ash. The ground beneath his feet was a smooth black surface that reflected faint images of himself and the twins, distorted as though in a rippling pool of water. "What? Where are we?" Keanu asked, his voice hushed. The twins remained at his sides, their expressions calm but serious. "You opened the way," the taller twin said. Keanu looked down at the key still in his hand. The once rusted and warm object was now glowing faintly, its intricate etchings pulsating like a heartbeat. He clenched it tightly, his mind spinning. "What is this place?" "The void," the shorter twin answered, her voice soft, but filled with an almost ancient wisdom. "It's where they come from. It's where they take people who can't escape." Keanu scanned the horizon, his instincts on high alert. There were no landmarks, no shadows, no sense of direction. The oppressive hum from the bunker was absent here, replaced by a deep silence that felt alive, like it was listening. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking at the twins. The taller twin gestured ahead, her gaze fixed on something unseen. "We keep going. There's someone you need to find." "Someone? Who?" They didn't answer, only tugged gently at his arms to lead him forward. With no better option, Keanu followed. The three of them walked in silence, the landscape remaining eerily unchanged, no matter how far they moved. Time felt irrelevant here. Each step stretched into an eternity, yet they seemed to make no progress. Keanu kept the key gripped tightly, its faint glow the only source of light in this strange place. After what felt like hours, a shape began to materialize in the distance. Keanu squinted, trying to make sense of it. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a structure, an enormous gate standing alone in the endless plain. The gate was ancient, carved from a dark, otherworldly stone that shimmered with faint iridescent colors. It stood impossibly tall, its towering arches etched with symbols similar to those Keanu had seen in the bunker. The air around it was charged with energy, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. "This is it," the shorter twin said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu approached cautiously, his every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The gate exuded a presence, a force that pressed against his chest and made it hard to breathe. "What's behind it?" he asked, glancing at the twins. The taller twin looked at him, her expression solemn. "The answers. And the others." Keanu frowned. "The others? The ones who are trapped?" She nodded. "But the gate won't open without the key." Keanu held up the key, its faint glow intensifying as he neared the gate. "And what happens when it does? What am I walking into?" The twins exchanged a glance before the shorter one said, "You'll find out when you're ready." Before Keanu could protest, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble echoed across the plain, growing louder with each passing second. He turned, his heart pounding as he scanned the horizon. In the distance, dark shapes began to rise, dozens of them, moving fluidly and quickly, like shadows come to life. Their ember-like eyes glowed menacingly, and the guttural growls from earlier filled the air. "They found us," the taller twin said, her voice steady but urgent. Keanu's grip on the key tightened. "How do I stop them?" "You don't," the shorter twin replied. "Not yet. You have to open the gate first." Keanu turned back to the gate, his mind racing. The shadows were closing in fast, their movements disjointed but coordinated, like a swarm of predators circling their prey. "Okay," he muttered to himself, raising the key. "Here goes nothing." The moment the key touched the gate, the air erupted with a deafening roar. Light exploded from the key's etchings, snaking across the surface of the gate like living fire. The symbols carved into the stone flared to life, their glow blinding and intense. Keanu staggered back as the ground beneath him quaked violently. The gate groaned, its massive doors slowly parting to reveal a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The twins stepped forward, their expressions unreadable as they turned to Keanu. "You have to go through," the taller twin said. "What about you?" Keanu asked, his voice strained over the roar of the vortex. "We can't come with you," the shorter twin replied, her tone heavy with regret. "We're part of this place, but you can end it." Keanu's chest tightened. "What if I can't?" "You can," the taller twin said firmly. "You have to." The shadows were almost upon them now, their growls blending into a deafening cacophony. Keanu hesitated for only a moment before steeling himself and stepping toward the gate. As he crossed the threshold, the vortex pulled him in, its energy tearing at his senses. The last thing he saw before the gate slammed shut behind him was the twins, their forms dissolving into the light. Keanu landed hard on a cold, metallic surface, the impact jarring every bone in his body. He groaned, pushing himself up to take in his surroundings. He was in a vast, cavernous chamber, its walls lined with machinery that hummed with an unnatural energy. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, and faint, distorted voices echoed in the distance. In the center of the chamber was a massive column of light, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. Suspended within it were dozens of human figures, men, women, and children, trapped in some kind of stasis. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The others. As he stepped closer to the column, a voice boomed from the shadows, stopping him in his tracks. "You shouldn't have come here." Keanu turned, his heart racing. Emerging from the darkness was a figure clad in flowing black robes, their face obscured by a featureless mask. Their presence was suffocating, their voice dripping with authority. "You don't belong in this place," the figure continued. "But now that you're here, you'll never leave." Keanu squared his shoulders, his grip tightening on the key still clutched in his hand. "I didn't come this far to turn back." The figure chuckled, a cold, hollow sound. "Then let's see if you're as strong as they believe." The chamber trembled as the machinery around them sprang to life, and the pulsating column of light began to shift. Keanu took a deep breath, bracing himself for the fight of his life. The unseen war. The chamber quaked violently as the masked figure advanced, their presence commanding and suffocating. The pulsating light from the massive column illuminated the vast room, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and shift with a life of their own. Keanu stood his ground, the weight of the ancient key pressing into his palm. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he clenched his jaw, his gaze locked on the figure. The lives of the trapped souls in the column hung in the balance, and he couldn't afford to falter. "I've seen enough movies to know how this ends," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his chest. "You underestimate the wrong guy." The figure's hollow laugh echoed, reverberating through the chamber. "This is not one of your stories, Keanu Reeves. This is reality, where your heroics mean nothing. You've wandered into a war far beyond your understanding." Keanu took a step forward, his jaw tightening. "Then explain it to me." The figure hesitated, tilting their head slightly. "You think yourself a savior, but you're merely a pawn. Do you know where you stand? What this place is?" Keanu gestured toward the column of light. "I know you're holding these people against their will. I know those girls, those twins, led me here for a reason, and I know I'm not leaving until I get them out." The figure's posture stiffened, and the air in the room seemed to grow colder. The twins. Of course, they meddle again. They are remnants of the void, fractured pieces of a long-forgotten balance. They are drawn to heroes like moths to flame, hoping one will succeed where all others have failed. Keanu frowned. "What balance? What are you talking about?" The figure extended a hand, and the air around them shimmered with energy. A swirling projection materialized, showing images of a fractured world. A dark plane where shadowy beings moved through cities and forests, their ember eyes glowing as they consumed everything in their path. "This is the origin," the figure said. "The void was never meant to intersect with your world, but humanity's arrogance tore the veil. You opened doors you didn't understand, seeking power and answers, and the void answered. The cost was steep." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "What cost?" "The void feeds on what it touches," the figure replied. "Memories, souls, time, everything you value, it consumes. The people you see in the column, they were not taken. They wandered in willingly, drawn by their own weaknesses." "That's a lie," Keanu shot back. "Those twins weren't weak. They didn't choose this." The figure's voice darkened. The twins are not what you think they are. They are the void's reflection, trapped between worlds. Their existence is both a warning and a lure. You followed their whispers, did you not? And now you stand here, caught in a web of your own making. Keanu's grip on the key tightened. He didn't trust the figure, but the weight of their words pressed on him. He glanced at the column, the suspended figures glowing faintly within the light. Each face bore an expression of fear, confusion, or despair. Whatever had brought them here, they didn't deserve to stay. "Maybe I am a pawn," Keanu said, his voice calm but resolute. "But even pawns can topple kings. Tell me how to free them." The figure's laughter was sharp and cold. "You still think you can fight the void? How quaint. Even if you destroy this chamber, the void remains. You cannot defeat it. You cannot even comprehend it." Keanu smirked faintly. "You'd be surprised what I can do." The figure raised their hand, and the room erupted into chaos. Shadowy tendrils burst from the walls and floor, writhing like living creatures as they surged toward Keanu. He dove to the side, rolling across the cold metal floor as one of the tendrils lashed where he had stood moments before. The key in his hand flared with light, and the tendrils recoiled, hissing like serpents. Keanu scrambled to his feet, the key's glow growing brighter with each passing second. He held it out like a torch, the light forcing the shadows to retreat. The figure hissed in frustration. "You have no idea what you're tampering with." "Then let me show you," Keanu retorted, charging toward the column. As he approached the column, the light's intensity grew, blinding him momentarily. The trapped figures stirred faintly, their eyes fluttering open, as though sensing his presence. Keanu pressed the key against the column, and the light rippled outward in waves, the machinery around it sparking and groaning under the strain. The column's light dimmed slightly, revealing a complex network of wires and tubes connecting it to the chamber walls. Keanu could see now that the machinery wasn't just containing the people, it was feeding on them, drawing their energy to sustain itself. He turned back toward the figure, his voice ringing out. "This ends now." The figure extended their hands, summoning a wall of shadows that surged toward him. Keanu braced himself, raising the key high. Its light exploded outward, cutting through the darkness like a blade and forcing the shadows to dissipate. The figure staggered, their composure cracking. "You don't know what you're doing. Destroying this place will unbind the void. It will consume everything." Keanu advanced, his voice steady. "Then tell me how to stop it without hurting anyone." The figure hesitated, their masked face tilting slightly. "You can't. The void isn't a thing to be stopped. It's a force, a presence. All you can do is delay it. But you—" They pointed at him, their voice laced with venom. "You've already crossed too far. The void has marked you." Keanu paused. "What does that mean?" The figure chuckled darkly. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Keanu could react, the figure dissolved into shadows, their presence vanishing from the chamber. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the machinery. Keanu turned back to the column, his heart pounding. He approached the machinery, inspecting the wires and tubes. The key in his hand pulsed faintly, as though guiding him. He pressed it against one of the wires, and it snapped with a burst of light. The column flickered, the trapped figures stirring more visibly now. "Almost there," Keanu muttered, moving quickly to sever the remaining connections. Each snap of the wire sent a surge of energy through the chamber, the floor trembling beneath his feet. As he severed the final connection, the column's light exploded outward in a dazzling burst. Keanu shielded his eyes, the key's warmth radiating through his hand. When the light faded, the column was gone, and the trapped figures were lying on the chamber floor, unconscious but alive. Keanu exhaled shakily, dropping to one knee. The key in his hand had dimmed, its glow now faint but steady. He looked at the freed individuals, relief flooding through him. But his relief was short-lived. The ground beneath him began to quake violently, and a familiar hum filled the air. The void wasn't done with him yet. Breaking the cycle. The chamber trembled as if it were alive, groaning under the weight of its collapsing machinery. The once dazzling light of the column was gone, replaced by a swirling darkness that seemed to seep from the cracks in the walls. Keanu stood in the center of the chaos, his chest heaving as he clutched the dimly glowing key. Around him, the freed figures stirred, their moans and whispers barely audible over the building roar of the void. The hum was back, louder and more menacing than ever. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a relentless force pressing down on Keanu like a tidal wave. The shadows around the chamber grew darker, deeper, taking on forms that twisted and writhed with malice. Keanu gritted his teeth. This isn't over. Not yet. Get up, he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. He turned to the freed captives, his adrenaline overriding his exhaustion. You have to move. Now. The people slowly pushed themselves up, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes filled with confusion and fear. Some stumbled, others crawled, but all of them moved toward him as if drawn by the faint glow of the key in his hand. What's happening? A woman asked, her voice trembling. Keanu didn't have time to explain. We're getting out of here, he said, his tone firm but reassuring. Stay close to me, and don't stop for anything. He turned toward the exit, but the path was no longer clear. The shadows had coalesced into a barrier, a wall of shifting darkness that seemed alive. Within the darkness, faint ember-like eyes blinked open, one by one, until dozens of them stared back at him. You will not leave, a voice growled from within the shadows. It was deep and guttural, vibrating in Keanu's chest. The void takes what it is owed. Keanu tightened his grip on the key, its faint glow pulsating in response to the threat. Not today, he said, stepping forward. The shadows surged, tendrils lashing out toward him and the captives. Keanu raised the key instinctively, and a burst of light erupted from it, forcing the darkness to recoil with an ear-piercing screech. Stay behind me, Keanu shouted, moving toward the barrier. The group pressed forward, Keanu at the front, as he carved a path through the encroaching shadows. The key's light grew brighter with each step, illuminating the chamber in blinding bursts. The shadows hissed and writhed, retreating but never disappearing entirely. As they neared the entrance, the hum reached a deafening crescendo. The ground cracked and splintered beneath their feet, and the machinery lining the walls began to collapse in on itself, sparks flying like fireflies in the dark. The masked figure reappeared suddenly, emerging from the shadows like a phantom. Their robe billowed as though caught in a violent storm, and their voice boomed with fury. You think you've won. You've only doomed them all. Keanu glared at the figure, stepping forward with the key raised. No one's doomed. Not while I'm still standing. The figure extended their hand, and the shadows surged toward him in a massive wave. Keanu braced himself, holding the key aloft as its light exploded outward, colliding with the darkness in a brilliant clash of energy. The force of the impact knocked him back, but he managed to stay on his feet. The shadows recoiled, and for a brief moment, the path to the exit was clear. Go, Keanu shouted, turning to the captives. Run. The group hesitated for only a second before scrambling toward the exit. Keanu followed closely behind, the key's light protecting them as the shadows clawed at their heels. They emerged from the bunker into the cold, open air of the void. The swirling crimson and ash sky stretched endlessly above them, and the featureless black plain seemed to ripple underfoot. The captives gasped and stumbled, their frail bodies barely able to keep up. Keanu turned to face the bunker, the shadows pouring out like a living flood. The masked figure hovered above the swarm, their eyes glowing with rage. You cannot escape the void, the figure snarled. It will follow you, consume you, until nothing remains. Keanu's heart pounded. He glanced at the key in his hand, its light now flickering like a dying flame. He didn't know how much power it had left, but he knew this was his last chance. Everyone, get behind me, he shouted. The captives huddled together, their fear palpable as the shadows closed in. Keanu stepped forward, planting himself firmly between them and the advancing darkness. He raised the key high, its glow sputtering as he poured his resolve into it. "You want me," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Then take me. Leave them alone." The shadows paused, the ember eyes flickering uncertainly. The masked figure tilted their head, as if considering his offer. "You would give yourself to the void?" the figure asked, their voice laced with suspicion. Keanu nodded, his jaw tight. "If it means they go free, yes." The figure descended slowly, their presence growing heavier with each step. "A bold choice," they said, their tone almost amused. "But the void does not bargain. It takes." The shadows surged forward, but before they could reach him, the key in Keanu's hand flared to life one last time. The light was blinding, piercing through the darkness with a force that shook the ground. Keanu felt the heat of the key sear into his palm, but he held on, pouring every ounce of his will into the light. "You don't get to decide anymore," he said through gritted teeth. "This ends here." The light erupted in a massive wave, sweeping across the plain and consuming the shadows. The masked figure let out an inhuman scream as the light engulfed them, their form disintegrating into wisps of darkness. The ground beneath Keanu cracked and splintered, and he felt himself falling. The captive's cries echoed around him, as the world seemed to collapse in on itself. And then, silence. Keanu awoke to the sound of birdsong. He opened his eyes to find himself lying in a grassy field under a clear blue sky. The sun warmed his face, and the air smelled fresh and clean. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard voices. Turning his head, he saw the captives standing nearby, their expressions filled with wonder and disbelief. The twins were among them, their white dresses pristine and their eyes bright with gratitude. "You did it," the taller twin said, her voice soft but steady. Keanu pushed himself up, his body aching but whole. "Did what?" "You broke the cycle," the shorter twin replied. "The void is gone. For now." Keanu frowned. "For now." The taller twin stepped forward, her expression serious. "The void can never truly be destroyed, but you've severed its hold on this place. You've given these people a chance to live again." Keanu looked at the group, his chest tightening with emotion. They were free. "What about you?" he asked the twins. The shorter twin smiled faintly. "We'll stay here, where we belong. Our time in the void is over." Keanu nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. "Thank you for guiding me." The taller twin reached out, placing a small hand on his arm. "Thank you, Keanu Reeves." As the twins stepped back, the world around him began to blur, the field dissolving into light. Keanu awoke with a start in the driver's seat of his SUV. The McDonald's parking lot was quiet, the golden arches glowing softly in the night. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. But when he looked down, he saw the key in his hand, no longer glowing, but unmistakably real. He sat back, exhaling deeply. Whatever had happened, it wasn't over. But for now, the world was safe, and he wasn't going to stop fighting for it.